He was the kind of man you could always count on, quiet, steadfast, devoted to his family. But one evening, over dinner, everything cracked under the weight of a simple phrase: "We need to talk." The woman he had trusted with 10 years of his life suggested an open marriage, not out of love, but for one night with her boss. She thought he'd break. Instead, he stood up, smiled coldly, and chose war. He wasn't just going to survive the betrayal. He would dismantle, brick by brick, everything that had torn his family apart. One by one, he would expose secrets, rip off masks, and drag into the light what had long hidden in the shadows. When a manipulator believes he's untouchable, that's when he's most vulnerable, especially when the man standing in his way is a father with nothing left to lose. Want to see what happens when a quiet man stops being quiet? Good day. Happy to have you here. Before we start the video, I have a small favor. Subscribe to my friend's channel using the link in the description. Your support would mean the world to him. Let's begin. Elias had always been viewed as the rock in his life, dependable, calm, and unwavering. He was the steady foundation in his family, the one who confronted challenges with poise and held on to a strong moral compass. In his 10-year marriage to Celine, Elias believed they shared not just affection, but a deep understanding, mutual respect, and shared goals. As a father to Landon, their 8-year-old son, Elias's commitment was unshakable. He worked tirelessly to create a home where Landon could flourish, surrounded by safety, love, and stability. Although Elias didn't crave the spotlight or the accolades that came with being recognized, his resilience was undeniable when faced with hardship. When confronted with adversity, he stood firm, refusing to back down. Celine, on the other hand, was the antithesis of Elias in many ways. She was charismatic, driven, and always in pursuit of the next thrill. In their early years together, Elias was drawn to her energy. Her ambition and zest for life complemented his more grounded approach to living. But as time passed, Celine's vivacity began to turn into a sense of dissatisfaction. The life they had built together no longer felt fulfilling to her. She sought excitement and meaning outside of her role as a wife and mother. And that was when Vincent entered the picture. He was a man of power and charm, a colleague of Celine's who showered her with attention and temptation. Celine's frustration found a perfect outlet in him, and Vincent was quick to seize on it. With his tailored suits and an air of superiority, he exuded dominance as her manager at work. His hold over her wasn't born from genuine connection, but from manipulation and control. Vincent was a master of emotional leverage, using people's vulnerabilities to further his own agenda. When he sensed Celine's longing for something more, he swooped in, positioning himself as the solution to all her unmet desires. To him, their interactions weren't about love, they were a conquest, a game. As the cracks in Elias's world started to show, his sister Kira stood by him, unwavering in her support. Kira had always been fiercely protective of Elias, from childhood onward. With a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude, she had an uncanny ability to see through dishonesty. When she began to suspect that something was amiss between Celine and Vincent, she didn't hesitate to act. Kira's loyalty and keen insight became Elias's shield as he braced for the inevitable storm. And at the heart of it all was Landon, a perceptive and emotionally sensitive boy who, despite his youth, could sense that something in their family wasn't right. Although Landon didn't fully understand the complexities of adult betrayal, his presence served as a steady anchor for Elias. Protecting his son's emotional well-being became Elias's top priority, and every decision he made was guided by this mission. Alongside him was Milo, Elias's college best friend and confidant, who knew him better than anyone else. Milo was an astute lawyer with a razor-sharp intellect, able to cut through the chaos and offer clarity in times of confusion. When Elias's life began to unravel, Milo didn't hesitate to step in, offering both legal counsel and emotional support. He helped Elias navigate through the turmoil of personal heartbreak and the looming threat of legal battles. Then there was Detective Cross, a seasoned investigator driven by a relentless pursuit of truth. Though his involvement came later than expected, Cross would play a pivotal role in exposing Vincent's manipulation, equipping Elias with the tools to confront the challenge ahead. Elias had always thought his life was stable, perhaps not perfect, but real and grounded, until one evening when Celine shattered that illusion with just a few words. The night had been peaceful, quiet even, when Celine dropped her bombshell across the dinner table, her voice calm, yet carrying an underlying tension. "We need to talk," she said, her expression carefully composed, hiding the turmoil beneath. Elias, unaware of the storm brewing, lowered his coffee mug and turned his full attention to her, his demeanor gentle and concerned. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm and inquisitive. Celine hesitated, her eyes flickering as if mentally rehearsing what she was about to say. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft but deliberate. "Maybe we should try something new in our marriage. What if we opened it up?" Her words hung in the air, striking Elias with the weight of a bombshell. Elias blinked, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. "An open marriage?" he echoed, his tone laced with disbelief. "Yes," she confirmed, a growing confidence in her voice. "It's not that I don't love you. I just feel like we've fallen into a routine, and maybe this is what we need to reconnect." Her urgency was palpable, as though she was trying to convince herself just as much as him. A wave of betrayal surged within Elias, but he fought to keep his composure. "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice low, the calm before the storm. She shifted, her hands clasped together, looking down before speaking again. "Then there's something else. My boss, Vincent, he's shown interest in me. He suggested that we spend a night together, no strings attached. It might help me figure out what I'm missing." Elias's thoughts were a whirlwind. Her proposal wasn't a suggestion. It was an ultimatum masked as an offer. She wasn't just flirting with the idea of infidelity. She was presenting it as a solution to their problems. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then, in a voice that was unnervingly calm, Elias leaned forward slightly. "So, these are my choices?" he asked, each word deliberate and measured. "Either I agree to an open marriage, or you sleep with your boss." Celine nodded, the certainty in her eyes now fading, her confidence waning. A cold smile curled at the corner of Elias's lips. His words, though soft, carried a chilling finality. "Here's my choice," he said. "You can pack your things and leave this house, or you can stay and watch what happens when I deal with Vincent. Either way, this marriage is over." Celine's eyes widened, a wave of disbelief washing over her as Elias's unyielding gaze began to erode the confidence she had carefully built. Everything she had assumed about him had been completely wrong. She had expected him to either give in or fight for her love. But Elias had already moved beyond the game she had set up. He was done. That night marked a defining moment in the collapse of Elias and Celine's marriage. Alone in their bedroom, Elias sat quietly, his thoughts racing as he looked back on the life they had once shared, now shattered in an instant. Despite the bitterness and heartache, one thought stood out above all others: Landon. Their son deserved far more than to grow up surrounded by deceit and betrayal. Elias vowed to protect Landon no matter what. The decision to divorce wasn't merely about ending his relationship with Celine, it was about securing a better future for his family. As Elias began to devise a plan, he realized it wasn't just a matter of salvaging his own pride. It was about building a future that both he and Landon truly deserved. The calm before the storm was finally over. The conflict was about to explode. Elias could hardly comprehend the words leaving Celine's mouth as she sat across from him at the kitchen table. Her demand came with the arrogance of someone who believed they held all the power. She spoke with an air of self-righteousness, leaning back with her arms crossed. "I've given you 10 years of my life, Elias," she said, her voice sharp. 10 years of putting everyone else first. "I'm not saying I don't love you," she added, "but I need something more, something exciting." Elias's hands balled into fists beneath the table. He had dedicated himself tirelessly, sacrificing his own dreams and comfort to provide for their family, ensuring that both Celine and Landon had everything they needed. Yet here she was, positioning herself as the victim in the very life they had built. "So, your solution is to cheat on me?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with fury. "It's not cheating if we both agree to it," Celine retorted, defensive in her tone. "And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think it could help us. Vincent understands me, Elias. He makes me feel seen." Elias's response was cold, his words sharp as ice. "Seen?" he repeated, his voice like a blade. "You want excitement? I'll give you excitement, starting with divorce papers." Celine's face drained of color. "You're overreacting," she stammered, her voice quivering. "You're just saying that because you're angry. We can work through this." Elias stood, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor filling the heavy silence. "There's nothing to work through, Celine," he said firmly. "You made your choice when you entertained this idea. I'm done." With that, he walked out, leaving Celine stunned into silence. For the first time, she realized how gravely she had misjudged him. She had expected him to beg, to plead for her to stay, to confront Vincent head-on. But instead, Elias was walking away, and the power she thought she held was slipping away from her. It didn't take long for Elias to recognize the unmistakable influence of Vincent in Celine's behavior. It was clear that Vincent had been sowing doubt in her mind for months, exploiting her insecurities and amplifying her dissatisfaction. Vincent wasn't just her boss. He was a manipulator, a predator who reveled in twisting others to his will. Celine, despite her flaws, had fallen prey to Vincent's promises. He dangled the allure of promotions, financial freedom, and a glamorous lifestyle, convincing her that Elias's stable, dependable love was holding her back. Vincent's charm masked his true nature, but Elias had seen through it all along. His suspicions were confirmed when Vincent had the nerve to contact him directly. The message came in the form of a smug email, dismissing Elias's anger and asserting his own sense of superiority. "Elias, I understand this must be difficult for you, but Selene deserves more than you can offer. You should step aside gracefully and let her find the happiness she deserves. Fighting this will only make things harder for everyone." Elias's blood boiled as he read it, but he didn't react as Vincent had hoped. Instead, Elias began formulating his strategy. If Vincent thought he could manipulate him into submission, he was sorely mistaken. The situation escalated even further when Vincent called Elias directly, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're a good guy, Elias," Vincent said. "But let's face it, you're not what Celine needs. She needs someone who can match her ambition and passion. Why don't you make this easy on yourself and step aside?" Elias remained composed, but his words were resolute. "You're a predator, Vincent. You've manipulated my wife into believing your lies, but this isn't over. You'll regret ever entering my life." Vincent laughed dismissively, but Elias's resolve only strengthened. This was no longer just about Celine's betrayal. It was about exposing Vincent for the manipulative fraud he was. Elias knew he couldn't face this battle alone. He reached out to Milo, his best friend and trusted confidant, someone who had always been a source of wisdom. Over beers at Milo's place, Elias poured everything out: the ultimatum, Celine's affair, and Vincent's manipulative games. Milo listened carefully, his jaw tightening as the details sank in. "That guy sounds like a piece of work," Milo said, shaking his head. "But he's not invincible. We'll figure out how to deal with this." Milo immediately set to work helping Elias devise a plan. As a lawyer, he understood the importance of building a solid case for custody and asset protection. "Start documenting everything," Milo advised. "Text messages, emails, anything that shows Seleni's behavior and Vincent's involvement. The more evidence you gather, the better your chances of emerging from this ordeal unscathed." Elias took Milo's advice seriously and began meticulously documenting everything: emails, screenshots, text messages, anything that hinted at the affair between Celine and Vincent. On top of that, he started keeping a detailed journal of Celine's erratic behavior and her neglect of Landon. Throughout all of this, his sister, Kira, remained a steady source of support. When Elias opened up to Kira, she was furious. "She doesn't get to tear your life apart and hurt Landon too," Kira said, her voice laced with righteous indignation. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you." Kira took the reins in making sure Landon felt secure and loved amid the turmoil. She drove him to school, helped him with homework, and created a sense of stability that Elias deeply appreciated. Although Elias knew that a divorce was unavoidable, his main concern was Landon. He couldn't allow Celine's betrayal to further disrupt their son's life. With Milo's counsel, he began preparing for a custody battle. He hired a top-tier divorce lawyer recommended by Milo and shared all the evidence he had gathered. The lawyer reassured him that his case was strong, especially with Celine's affair and Vincent's negative influence on her. At home, Elias stayed patient, playing the long game. Rather than confronting Celine directly, he allowed her to keep digging herself into a deeper hole. Celine continued her time with Vincent, oblivious to the fact that Elias was documenting every move she made. His calmness wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a calculated move to ensure he had the upper hand when the time came. As the days passed, Celine started to sense a change in Elias. His calm demeanor unsettled her, and she began to feel that he was planning something. She tried to provoke him, hoping to trigger a reaction that would confirm her belief that he was the issue. But Elias remained unaffected, focusing entirely on Landon and committing himself to being the best father he could be. His love for Landon grounded him amidst the chaos. The stage was set for the battle ahead. Elias was determined to fight for his son, his dignity, and his future. He was willing to do whatever it took to hold Celine and Vincent accountable for their actions. The repercussions of their betrayal were just beginning to unfold, and Elias knew that Vincent was far more dangerous than he appeared. Vincent's manipulation of Celine was just the tip of the iceberg. He was a man driven by a thirst for control and power. With Milo's help, Elias delved into Vincent's past, uncovering a disturbing pattern that revealed the true nature of the man. Milo, ever the strategist, began by scouring public records and social media, uncovering troubling details about Vincent's past behavior. They discovered a high turnover rate at Vincent's company, particularly among female employees working directly under him. This wasn't a coincidence. Former employees had left cryptic comments online, hinting at a toxic and abusive work environment. One post, in particular, stood out to Milo. "Working there was the biggest mistake of my life. I wish I'd spoken out sooner, but he's untouchable." Driven by a mix of curiosity and determination, Milo reached out to Evelyn, a former assistant who had worked closely with Vincent. After some convincing, Evelyn agreed to meet with both Milo and Elias. In a quiet cafe, she recounted her painful experiences. Vincent had initially offered mentorship, but it soon escalated into inappropriate comments and eventual coercion. He used his position of power to manipulate her into a relationship, threatening her career when she attempted to end it. "He makes you believe you're special," Evelyn said, her voice trembling as she relived the trauma. "But once you're no longer of use to him, he tosses you aside like you don't matter. He destroyed my confidence, my career, and almost my life." Evelyn had kept a record of the emails and messages Vincent had sent her, but had been too scared to come forward. until now. With Elias's support, she finally felt ready to take action. She handed the evidence over to Detective Cross, an experienced investigator who immediately understood the case's significance. Cross started building a broader case against Vincent, connecting Evelyn's story to others who had suffered similar experiences. As the investigation progressed, Elias discovered that Celine wasn't the first woman Vincent had manipulated, nor would she be the last. Vincent had targeted vulnerable women for years, using the same manipulative tactics over and over again. He offered promises of promotions, extravagant gifts, and validation, all part of his well-rehearsed playbook. But once the women either resisted or became inconvenient, he discarded them without a second thought. The more Elias uncovered, the more resolved he became to put an end to Vincent's manipulative reign. This had grown into something far beyond just saving his marriage. It was about seeking justice for the women Vincent had hurt and preventing him from manipulating anyone else. As Elias dug deeper into Vincent's deceitful actions, he started noticing unsettling changes in Celine's behavior. There were receipts from luxury boutiques he didn't recognize, unexplained withdrawals from their joint bank account, and lavish gifts that Celine claimed were from sales. These were all warning signs. The truth finally dawned on him. Celine had been funneling money from their shared finances to maintain a lavish new lifestyle that Vincent encouraged and benefited from. Elias found a luxury brand necklace, receipts for expensive dinners, and hotel stays far beyond Celine's usual means of spending. The final blow came when he discovered a handwritten note from Vincent hidden in Celine's dresser drawer. The note, filled with excessive compliments and promises of a future together, confirmed everything Elias had suspected. Vincent had been grooming Celine as part of his sinister scheme. When Elias confronted her, Celine didn't deny the affair. Instead, she defended her actions, claiming they were a result of feeling neglected in their marriage. "You don't understand me, Elias," she said, her voice a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Vincent was always there for me in ways that you never could be." Elias's anger was like a quiet storm, building beneath the surface, but he managed to keep his composure. "Supports you?" His voice was icy. "By controlling you? By draining our account just to feed his own ego?" "Celine, wake up. He's not your savior. He's a predator, and you're just another pawn in his game." But Celine couldn't see it. She clung to Vincent's empty promises as though they were her salvation. Her words only served to fuel Elias's resolve to cut all ties with her. It became increasingly clear to Elias that Celine had been so deeply influenced by Vincent that she was no longer capable of seeing the truth. Any hope of salvaging their marriage was gone. Detective Cross's investigation, coupled with Elias's own findings, became a turning point in his battle against Vincent and Celine's betrayal. Cross's case against Vincent was gaining momentum as more victims came forward, emboldened by Evelyn's bravery. Each testimony painted a damning picture of Vincent's predatory nature, exposing the depth of the chaos he had caused in Elias's life. Meanwhile, Elias focused on gathering evidence against Celine. He amassed proof of her financial recklessness, her infidelity, and her neglect of Landon. His goal wasn't simply to end the marriage, it was to protect Landon and ensure that he grew up in a stable, loving environment, free from Celine's destructive behavior and Vincent's toxic influence. As the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Elias's anger transformed into a powerful determination. He no longer felt blindsided and helpless. He was taking control. Elias wasn't merely reacting to the betrayal. He was actively creating a better future for himself and Landon. He was determined to come out stronger. In his journey of betrayal, Elias not only discovered the extent of Vincent's manipulation, but also the flaws in Celine's character. Though the pain of her betrayal hurt, Elias found strength in the realization that he was no longer tethered to a toxic relationship. With the support of Milo, Kira, and Detective Cross, He finally had a solid foundation to rely on, and with Landon as his anchor, Elias found his purpose. Vincent's true nature was being exposed, Celine's lies were beginning to crumble, and Elias had finally regained control. The next chapter was all about justice, closure, and rebuilding. It was a fight that Elias was more than ready to take on. Elias had reached his breaking point. After weeks of enduring manipulation, taunts, and the emotional wreckage of Celine's betrayal, he knew the time had come to face Vincent. The predator had hidden in the shadows for too long, pulling Celine's strings and wreaking havoc on Elias's life. But Vincent's arrogance had made him careless, and Elias was prepared to use that against him. Milo had tipped him off about Vincent's frequent visits to an upscale restaurant in the city. It was the place where Vincent flaunted his wealth and charmed his latest targets. Elias planned his approach carefully, ensuring that everything was in place for a confrontation that would count. That evening, he walked into the restaurant, dressed simply but deliberately, setting himself apart from the sea of expensive suits and polished decor. He spotted Vincent sitting at a corner table, surrounded by a small group of admirers, his loud laugh ringing through the soft murmur of conversation. Elias made his way toward him, his outward calm belying the storm raging inside. As Elias neared the table, the chatter around Vincent died down, and Vincent leaned back in his chair, an arrogant smirk spreading across his face. "Well, well," Vincent drawled, eyeing Elias with amusement. "Didn't think you'd have the guts to show up here." Elias didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he placed both hands firmly on the table, leaning in slightly, letting Vincent feel the weight of his presence. "We need to talk," he said, his voice controlled and low. Vincent waved him off dismissively. "Talk? About what?" "Celine's happier with me, Elias. You know it, I know it. Just let it go. You're out of your depth here." Elias clenched his jaw, but he refused to let Vincent see how deeply those words affected him. "Happier?" Elias repeated, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You've manipulated her, lied to her, used her to boost your own ego. You're a parasite, Vincent, and I'm here to make sure you know your time's up." For a split second, Vincent's confident smirk faltered, but it quickly returned. "You think you can intimidate me?" Vincent sneered, leaning forward. "I've dealt with men like you before. Weak, desperate, holding on to something that's already gone. Face it, Elias. You've lost." Those words were the breaking point. In a flash, Elias's fist slammed into Vincent's jaw. The force of the punch sent Vincent flying backward, his chair tipping over as he collapsed to the floor. Gasps rang out from the surrounding diners, and a hushed silence descended over the restaurant as all eyes turned to watch the unfolding scene. Vincent scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. "You're going to regret that," he snarled, charging toward Elias. But Elias was ready. Years of pent-up frustration and pain drove his every move as he sidestepped Vincent's clumsy attack, grabbed his arm, and twisted it with precision. Vincent cried out in pain as a sharp crack echoed through the room. He staggered, his leg buckling beneath him, and fell once more, this time crashing into a nearby table. The onlookers whispered amongst themselves, some even pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. Vincent's anguished cries echoed loudly enough to catch the attention of the restaurant's manager, who quickly rushed over to assess the situation. Elias, standing with poise, appeared calm and composed, even as adrenaline surged through his veins. "He pushed me," Elias explained coolly, motioning toward the crowd that had gathered. There are many witnesses who will confirm that. Several people nodded in agreement, murmuring that Vincent had been taunting Elias since his arrival. Even the manager, who had overheard part of the exchange, seemed to align with Elias. Shortly afterward, paramedics arrived to tend to Vincent's injuries. As they carefully lifted him onto a stretcher, Elias exchanged one final glance with him. "That's the last time you'll mess with my family," he said, his voice low and unwavering. Vincent remained silent, his pride thoroughly crushed. The following day, Elias moved forward with his decision to end his marriage. He met with a lawyer, a professional recommended by Milo, and finalized the divorce papers. The documents were thorough, detailing Celane's infidelity and providing irrefutable evidence of her neglectful behavior toward Landon. Elias's case for custody was strong, backed by meticulous documentation and the willingness of several witnesses to testify in his favor. To make a public statement, Elias ensured that Celane received the divorce papers in a very public manner. A courier delivered the envelope to Celane as she was finishing a meeting, handing it to her in front of her colleagues. Her face paled as she read through the contents. Her co-workers exchanged uncomfortable glances, quietly discussing the situation as the truth began to spread. To make matters worse, Vincent, still recovering from his injuries, watched the scene unfold from his office window. His anger and humiliation grew as he realized that Elias had once again outwitted him. With Celane rattled and Vincent left powerless, Elias shifted his focus to securing his future with Landon. He worked closely with his lawyer to ensure his case for full custody was rock solid, emphasizing his unwavering and nurturing role as a father. The evidence of Celane's affair, combined with Vincent's toxic influence, painted a damning picture that would be difficult for any court to ignore. Kira and Milo continued to stand by Elias's side, providing both practical help and emotional support. Meanwhile, Landon, blissfully unaware of the full extent of the drama surrounding him, found comfort in the constancy and love that Elias offered. The confrontation at the restaurant marked a pivotal moment in Elias's journey. It wasn't just a physical confrontation. It was a statement, tearing down Vincent's false image and exposing him for the bully he truly was. The public nature of the altercation ensured that Vincent's reputation took a serious hit, alienating him from those who had once admired his charm. For Celane, receiving the divorce papers and witnessing the fallout from Vincent's injury served as a harsh wake-up call. She had risked everything on a relationship built on lies, and now she was left to face the consequences. Elias, on the other hand, emerged from the chaos stronger and more determined than ever to rebuild his life and protect his son. The altercation was not just about physical dominance, it was about reclaiming control, setting boundaries, and ensuring justice was served. For Elias, it marked the start of a new chapter. Celane had always craved admiration. Her colleagues frequently envied her poise, elegance, and the seemingly perfect life she presented. However, after her affair and Vincent's public disgrace, her carefully constructed world began to unravel. The repercussions began almost immediately after the restaurant incident. Word of the altercation spread quickly throughout Vincent's company. Initially, the whispers remained confined to office corridors. Rumors circulated about how Vincent had been publicly outshone by Celane's husband. But as more details emerged, Vincent's inappropriate relationship with Celane and his long history of misconduct, the scandal exploded. Employees who had previously kept quiet about Vincent's manipulative behavior started to speak out, emboldened by the public revelation of his downfall. The company initiated an internal investigation, which uncovered years of unethical practices, inappropriate relationships with subordinates, financial misconduct, and instances of harassment. Vincent's once untouchable image as a charismatic and powerful leader quickly crumbled under the weight of the evidence. He was immediately suspended pending the investigation, and eventually, he was terminated. The company issued a statement denouncing his actions and distancing itself from the scandal. For Celane, the fallout was devastating. Many of her colleagues, once captivated by her confidence and charm, now viewed her with skepticism. Whispers filled the air, questioning how much she had known about Vincent's behavior and whether she had played a part in his misconduct. Some speculated that she had used her relationship with Vincent to advance her career, while others saw her as a naive woman who had been deceived by his lies. Regardless of the opinions, One thing was clear. Celine no longer commanded the respect she once had in her professional circle. The isolation was crushing. Celine found herself excluded from meetings, overlooked for projects, and avoided in the break room. Even casual acquaintances stopped returning her calls, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Her once promising career now felt like a fragile house of cards, toppling under the weight of her poor decisions. As the investigation into Vincent deepened, Celine began to see the cracks in his carefully crafted persona. The man who had promised her excitement, independence, and a better life turned out to be nothing more than a selfish predator. Celine overheard her former colleagues discussing how Vincent had discarded other women once they were no longer of use to him. The stories seemed eerily familiar: empty promises, manipulation, and eventual abandonment. Celine attempted to confront Vincent, but he dismissed her with cold indifference, his charm now replaced with apathy. He gazed at her with an emotionless coldness, his words dripping with disdain. "You knew exactly what you were getting into," he said, his voice no longer warm but sharp with contempt. "Don't act like you're the one who's innocent." Celine felt the impact of his words like a physical blow, the weight of the realization crashing down on her. She had sacrificed everything: her marriage, her reputation, and her son's trust, all for a man who had only ever cared about himself. The connection she once had with Vincent shattered in an instant, leaving Celine to face the fallout of her choices. While her personal and professional life spiraled into chaos, Elias's sole focus was securing a stable future for Landon. Alongside Milo, Elias meticulously built a strong case for custody, presenting undeniable evidence of Celine's neglect, her poor judgment, and the toxic influence of Vincent. In court, Elias's calm, calculated demeanor stood in stark contrast to Celine's increasingly erratic behavior. The documents he had carefully gathered, texts, financial records, and accounts of Celine's time with Vincent, painted a clear picture of a mother who had prioritized her own desires over her son's well-being. Witnesses, including Kira and several of Celine's former colleagues, provided further testimony that strengthened Elias's case. Celine attempted to defend herself, arguing that her actions didn't make her a bad mother, but her defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The court was particularly concerned about the harmful impact of Vincent's influence on Landon, emphasizing the importance of a stable, secure environment for him. When the judge issued the ruling, it was a decisive win for Elias. He was awarded full custody of Landon, while Celine was granted only limited visitation. The court made it clear that Celine's visits would be supervised until she could demonstrate that she could provide a stable, nurturing presence in Landon's life. Losing custody of Landon crushed Celine. She had always believed that regardless of what happened, she would always be Landon's mother. But the judge's decision, and the cold distance she now felt from her son, made her realize just how much damage she had caused. Landon, ever perceptive, was left confused and conflicted, struggling to understand his emotions toward her. Although he didn't fully comprehend the details of what had transpired, he could sense the pain and betrayal. Celine's actions had shaken his sense of security, and he now found comfort in Elias, who provided the stability he desperately needed. During her supervised visits, Celine attempted to reconnect with Landon, but the bond between them felt fragile. He was polite but distant, offering short responses and avoiding eye contact. Her attempts to explain herself only seemed to push him further away. "I'm still your mom, Landon," she pleaded one day, her voice quivering with desperation. "I made mistakes, but I love you." Landon's gaze met hers, but confusion and sorrow clouded his eyes. "Why did you hurt Dad?" he asked quietly. The question hit Celine like a tidal wave, leaving her speechless. She had no answers that could undo the harm, no words that could repair what she had broken. For the first time, Celine understood that rebuilding her relationship with Landon would require more than just apologies. It would take years of effort, patience, and deep introspection. Celine had hit rock bottom. She had lost her husband, her career, her lover, and her son's trust. The life she once knew was gone, replaced by an empty apartment, a tarnished reputation, and the heavy weight of her mistakes. In a desperate attempt to make sense of her fractured life, Celine began attending therapy. Her therapist, Dr. Rourke, encouraged her to confront her past actions and the insecurities that had driven her choices. It was a difficult and painful journey, but Celine knew it was the only way to move forward. Though far from redemption, Celine began taking small steps to rebuild her life. She found a part-time job at a local cafe, far removed from the corporate world she once ruled. She enrolled in parenting classes, hoping to prove to both the court and Landon that she was committed to being a better mother. But the path ahead was long and uncertain. The scars of her past decisions wouldn't heal quickly, and Celine knew that she might never fully regain the life she had lost. For now, all she could do was try to piece together the fragments of her existence and hold on to the hope that one day she could make amends. Vincent's downfall began when Detective Cross entered the scene. Renowned for uncovering hidden crimes and bringing even the most deceptive criminals to justice, Cross quickly set his sights on Vincent. What began as an investigation into his relationship with Celine soon unfolded into a complex web of fraud, deceit, and misconduct that had spanned years. Cross's investigation revealed that Vincent had been embezzling company funds for his personal indulgences, lavish vacations, extravagant purchases, and bribes to silence whistleblowers. The financial records were damning, revealing embezzlement in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But that was only the beginning. As Cross delved deeper, he uncovered a disturbing pattern of harassment from Vincent's former employees. Women who had once been too fearful to speak out now found the courage to tell their stories. Miranda, a former assistant, bravely shared her experience of coercion and threats. Evelyn, another victim, came forward with damning emails and text messages that showed how Vincent had exploited his position of power to manipulate her into compromising situations. Each new revelation piled on more evidence, strengthening the case against him. Detective Cross worked tirelessly, compiling a bulletproof case that he presented to the district attorney. The charges against Vincent mounted: fraud, harassment, embezzlement, and abuse of power. The case was airtight, ensuring that Vincent would be held accountable for his actions. When Vincent was arrested, the news spread like wildfire. Images of him being escorted out of his penthouse in handcuffs flooded social media, cementing his image as the face of corporate greed and corruption. Vincent's fall from grace was swift and undeniable, leaving no room for doubt about his misconduct. Once a towering figure in his industry, his professional life unraveled in a dramatic and unmistakable display. The corporation he had once controlled with absolute authority severed all ties with him, publicly denouncing his actions and pledging reforms to prevent such behavior in the future. His colleagues, many of whom had put up with his arrogance out of fear or self-interest, wasted no time distancing themselves. Under mounting pressure from investors, the board took immediate legal action, filing a civil lawsuit to recover the embezzled funds, tightening the noose around Vincent's downfall. The financial consequences of his misdeeds were disastrous. As the investigation progressed, Vincent's assets were frozen, and the mounting legal fees quickly drained the remnants of his once vast fortune. His opulent mansion, luxury vehicles, and private investments were sold off to cover increasing debts and provide restitution to those he had wronged. The man who had once proudly displayed his wealth now found himself living in a modest rental, a stark contrast to his former lavish lifestyle. His personal relationships, already strained by his tarnished professional reputation, deteriorated just as rapidly. The few people who had remained in his circle turned their backs on him, unwilling to be linked to someone so publicly disgraced. His family, including a brother who had once looked up to him, cut off all communication, unable to reconcile the man they had known with the one he had become. Isolated and alone, Vincent was left to face the consequences of his actions with no support. His fall from grace sent ripples far beyond his own life, affecting everyone who had been connected to him. His victims, many of whom had silently suffered for years, were finally able to find justice. The legal proceedings and criminal charges gave them the closure they had long yearned for, providing them the chance to rebuild their lives. Celine, once captivated by Vincent's charm and promises, was forced to confront the truth about who he really was. Watching his empire collapse and his true nature be revealed filled her with humiliation and regret. She had left her marriage and family for a man who had been deceiving her from the very start. Despite her efforts to distance herself from the scandal, her reputation and self-worth had been irrevocably harmed. For Elias, Vincent's downfall was a long-awaited vindication. The man who had tried to destroy his family and ruin his integrity had been exposed as the fraud he truly was. While Elias did not take pleasure in Vincent's misery, he found solace in knowing that Vincent would never again have the power to harm anyone. The final act of Vincent's unraveling came when he was sentenced. The courtroom, filled with reporters, former employees, and victims, buzzed with anticipation to see justice served. As the judge recounted Vincent's crimes and sentenced him to 15 years behind bars, the atmosphere was one of mixed relief and satisfaction. Vincent sat motionless, his once confident demeanor replaced with a look of emptiness and defeat. Detective Cross, who had been instrumental in bringing Vincent to justice, later remarked, "He believed he was untouchable, but no one is beyond the reach of the law. People like him thrive on manipulation and fear, but when the truth emerges, they crumble." Vincent's imprisonment marked the end of his reign of greed and deceit. The name that had once been synonymous with power and success had become a cautionary tale. It served as a reminder that every action carries consequences, and even the most carefully constructed lies will eventually be exposed. Left alone in his prison cell, Vincent had nothing but time to reflect on the choices that had led to his fall. Meanwhile, those he had wronged moved forward, free from his toxic influence. Vincent's collapse was not just a personal failure, it was a victory for those he had tormented. It proved that justice could triumph, even against those who appeared to be untouchable. For Elias, it marked the final chapter in a saga of betrayal, endurance, and redemption. Elias stood quietly in his newly organized living room, sunlight streaming through the curtains, with the sound of Landon's laughter ringing in the background. For the first time in what seemed like ages, their home felt like a refuge once again, free from the chaos and betrayal that had once threatened to engulf them. With the divorce finalized and Vincent's destructive influence gone, Elias resolved to focus on what truly mattered, creating a stable and loving environment for his son. He threw himself into fatherhood with renewed vigor. Elias dedicated himself to ensuring that Landon felt supported and cherished, despite all they had been through. Weekends became a sacred time for father-son bonding, filled with activities Landon loved, trips to the park, afternoons spent building complex Lego creations, and movie nights filled with laughter and popcorn. Landon, ever perceptive, began to thrive under Elias's unwavering care. His bright smile and infectious laughter were a testament to the healing they both needed. As Elias concentrated on providing Landon with the security he needed, he also began rediscovering parts of himself. The stress and turmoil of his marriage had caused him to lose touch with the hobbies and passions that once brought him joy. Now, with the space to reflect and breathe, Elias decided it was time to reconnect with those aspects of his life. One afternoon, as he cleaned out the garage, he stumbled upon his old woodworking tools that had long been forgotten. Seeing them brought a flood of memories of late nights spent crafting furniture and intricate designs, a creative outlet that had once been a source of great fulfillment. He cleaned them up and began working on small projects, starting with a bookshelf for Landon's growing collection of books and a coffee table for their living room. The rhythmic sound of the saw and the scent of freshly cut wood became therapeutic, grounding him in the present while allowing his mind to wander. He also returned to running, a pastime he had always enjoyed, but had neglected during the strain of his marriage. Early morning runs through his quiet neighborhood became moments of reflection and rejuvenation. With every step, he felt a release, and each mile reminded him of his strength and resilience. By the time he returned home, drenched in sweat but filled with endorphins, he felt more centered, more himself. Elias's days began to settle into a comforting routine: fatherhood, work, woodworking, and running. Elias's new routine had settled into a peaceful rhythm, a striking contrast to the chaos that once ruled his life. Little by little, he began to feel the weight of his past lifting, replaced by a sense of calm and newfound direction. One evening, while having dinner with Kira, Elias opened up about the overwhelming challenge of managing his responsibilities, being a father, working, and trying to heal emotionally. Kira, ever understanding, listened intently, her eyes soft with empathy. After a brief pause, she leaned back in her chair and smiled gently. "I think it might be a good idea for you to meet someone," she said thoughtfully. "Her name's Raina. She's a friend of mine from my book club. She's been through something really similar. Her ex left her to raise their 2 children on her own. She's one of the most resilient, compassionate people I know," Kira added warmly. Elias hesitated, the thought of diving back into dating both intimidating and unlikely. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," he admitted. "There's already so much to handle with Landon and everything else in my life." Kira reached out and gently squeezed his hand across the table. "I'm not asking you to rush into anything, Elias. Just meet her. She's not looking for a relationship, just someone to talk to. I think you two might really get along." After some thought, Elias agreed to meet Raina, and Kira arranged for them to have coffee at a quiet cafe. When Elias arrived, he immediately noticed her presence. Raina had a warm, inviting smile, kind eyes, and an air of quiet strength. She greeted him with a handshake and said, "Kira's told me a lot about you. It's nice to finally meet you." To Elias's surprise, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Raina shared her own story, how her ex-husband had betrayed her, how she'd fought to provide stability for her children, and how she was still navigating the journey of rebuilding her life. Elias found himself opening up as well, sharing the trials and triumphs he'd faced. Over the following weeks, their meetings continued, and each conversation brought them closer. What began as mutual understanding gradually blossomed into something deeper. Raina's resilience and kindness inspired Elias, and the sound of her laughter became a comforting balm for his weary soul. She never pressured him, allowing their connection to develop naturally. As their children quickly became friends, the bond between Elias and Raina grew stronger. Watching Landon play with Raina's kids brought Elias an unexpected sense of joy, proof that even in the most challenging of times, new beginnings were possible. As the months passed, Elias and Raina's relationship deepened. It wasn't built on grand romantic gestures or fiery passion, but rather on a solid foundation of trust, respect, and shared values. Raina understood the complexities of starting over, the doubts, the fears, and she never tried to rush Elias into being someone he wasn't. With her, Elias felt truly seen and appreciated in a way he hadn't in a long time. Their relationship wasn't about filling an emotional gap or escaping the past. It was about creating something meaningful together. They supported each other's healing journeys, encouraging one another as they moved forward into the next chapters of their lives. One evening, as they sat on Raina's porch watching their children chase fireflies, Raina turned to Elias and said, "I'm so glad we met. I never thought I'd find someone who understands what it means to start over." Elias smiled, taking her hand in his. I didn't think I'd find someone either, but I'm really glad we found each other." Elias's life, though far from perfect, had become his own again, a life built anew from the ashes of the past. With Landon by his side, Raina beside him, and a renewed sense of purpose, he felt prepared to face whatever the future held. The pain of his past still lingered, but it no longer controlled him. Instead, it stood as a testament to his strength and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. Elias had never imagined himself sharing his personal struggles with strangers, let alone turning his pain into something that might help others. Yet here he was, standing in front of a small group at a community center, recounting his journey with the quiet confidence that only comes from enduring hardship and emerging stronger. The group, a mix of people at different stages of recovery from broken relationships, listened attentively as Elias spoke. He shared the raw truths of his experience, the shock of Celine's betrayal, the sting of Vincent's cruel words, and the quiet determination that had carried him through the hardest moments. He didn't sugarcoat the pain or pretend it had been easy, but he stressed the importance of holding on to one's values in the face of heartbreak. "Betrayal," Elias said, his voice steady, "can feel like the end of everything. It rips apart the life you thought you knew, but it doesn't have to define you. What defines you is how you respond, whether you let it break you or use it as the foundation to rebuild something stronger." The group nodded in understanding, some wiping away tears, others exchanging knowing looks. Elias's words resonated not because he had solutions, but because they were born of honesty. He wasn't there to preach, he was there to show that healing was possible, that they weren't alone in their struggles. Motivated by his own healing, Elias began to write about his experiences. Late at night, after Landon had gone to bed, he would sit at his desk, letting the words flow freely. Elias documented the invaluable insights he had gained, the mistakes he had made, and the small victories that propelled him forward. His words were unpolished, raw, yet they struck a chord with everyone who read them. Milo encouraged him to share his reflections online, and soon Elias's blog transformed into a source of comfort and encouragement for others grappling with similar challenges. Through this unexpected platform, Elias found a sense of purpose that had previously eluded him. By opening up about his experiences, he turned his own struggles into something meaningful, something that inspired others to tap into their own resilience. In the process, he found the peace he had long been searching for, not because he had erased his past, but because he had come to terms with it. Over time, life had settled into a harmonious routine for both Elias and Landon. Their simple, yet welcoming home had become a refuge, radiating warmth and laughter, far removed from the stress and uncertainty that once overshadowed their lives. Elias had made it his mission to create an environment where Landon could feel safe, loved, and free to be himself. One evening, after dinner, Elias and Landon sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by a sea of scattered Lego pieces, working together to build a spaceship. Landon's face shone with excitement as he eagerly shared his ideas for the design, his hands quickly assembling the pieces into shape. "Dad, do you think we'll finish it tonight?" Landon asked, his eyes bright with anticipation. Elias chuckled softly. "At this rate, we might need to finish it tomorrow morning, but that's okay. We've got all the time in the world," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. Their laughter echoed throughout the room, blending with the soft melody of music playing in the background. For Elias, this moment encapsulated everything he had worked so hard for: Landon's joy, their bond, and the future they were building together. As bedtime neared, Elias tucked Landon into bed, listening as his son excitedly recounted the highlights of his day. Landon's once frequent questions about the past had grown fewer, his focus now on the promising future ahead. This shift was a clear sign of healing, and it filled Elias with a quiet sense of pride. As the house grew still, Elias stepped outside onto the porch, taking in the calm of the night sky. The serene evening stood in stark contrast to the chaos he had once known. He thought about the distance he had traveled, not only in rebuilding his life, but in rediscovering his true self. The man who had once been lost and broken now stood strong, shaped by the lessons he had learned and the support of those who had stood by him. When Elias came back inside and shut the door behind him, he felt a symbolic release, as if locking it closed meant sealing away the past, along with the hurt and betrayal that had once overwhelmed him. Before him lay a future shaped not by what he had lost, but by what he had gained: strength, peace, and the unshakable bond with Landon. The final image was of Elias standing in the tranquility of his home, a gentle smile curling on his lips as he looked ahead toward the future. He had weathered the storm, endured its hardships, and emerged stronger because of it. As he turned off the lights and headed to bed, Elias carried with him a quiet assurance that brighter days were still on the horizon. Our first tale has come to a close, but don't hit pause just yet. A brand new adventure is just about to start. Two officers guided an emotionally overwhelmed Nancy into the stark interrogation room. The atmosphere was cold and impersonal, with no windows, only a large two-way mirror on one of the walls. At the center of the room, a table sat between two chairs, facing each other. A camera and microphone rested on the surface. One of the officers motioned for Nancy to sit opposite the mirror. She collapsed into the chair, her tear-streaked face a portrait of sorrow. The officers left, and not long after, a young woman entered, her badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck. "I'm Detective Lincoln." "Sarah Lincoln," she said, settling into the chair across from Nancy. "I know you're going through an incredibly difficult time right now, but we need to go over everything that led up to the events this morning at the liquor store parking lot." "I've already told the officers everything," Nancy responded, her voice trembling. "I've been here for hours, and I just want to go home to my family." Her voice broke, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The detective glanced at the mirror and made a subtle gesture. Moments later, an officer entered, placed a box of tissues on the table, and quietly exited, closing the door behind him. "My daughter needs me," Nancy sobbed. "I need to go home." "I completely understand, Mrs. Westford," Detective Lincoln said softly. "But there's been so much distress and crying that the officers couldn't make sense of anything. After you contacted your parents, they went to your house, and they're there with your daughter right now." She paused. "I just have a few questions for you." "We need to piece this together," Lincoln continued, reaching out to gently take Nancy's hand. "This isn't an interrogation. Think of it more like a conversation between two women, two adults." Nancy sniffled and nodded, trying to compose herself. The detective added, "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "No, thank you," Nancy replied, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "Let's just get this over with. Where should I begin?" Taking a deep breath, Nancy grabbed another tissue and started to tell her story. "I was born Nancy Stewart. On my first day of first grade, the teacher seated me next to Steve Westford. He was such a charming boy. He had these unique school supplies, multicolored pens, a pencil with a Mickey Mouse head, a butterfly-shaped sharpener, and a scented eraser. We hit it off immediately and started sitting together at lunch. One afternoon, when my mom came to pick me up, Steve rushed over and handed me a pen. My mom was surprised and remarked that I had already caught someone's attention on my first day of school, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. From that moment, we were inseparable. We did everything together, every class, always sitting next to each other. The whole school knew we were a pair. And then, the night of our high school graduation, we became more than friends. He's always been so gentle and passionate, Nancy continued. And what about your families? Detective Lincoln asked. Did they know about your relationship? Oh yes, they knew we were in love from the very beginning. Nancy nodded. They were fine with it. After high school, I went to college to study business administration, and Steve chose accounting. He was always great with numbers. After we graduated, Steve landed a job as a junior accountant at a cosmetics company, and I started working in the administrative department of a supply chain company. 3 months later, we got married. Steve was an only child, so we moved in with his parents. He said we should save up for a home of our own, for our future children. A year later, Stephanie was born. We named her after Steve. He was overjoyed, the happiest man on earth. I knew right away that she would be a daddy's girl. After we brought her home, Steve spent almost all his time in her room, singing or humming to her by her crib. Nancy's voice quivered. He was such a devoted father. "Was he neglecting you?" Detective Lincoln asked. "No, no," Nancy said, shaking her head. "Steve was a perfect gentleman." "Be strong, Mrs. Westford," the detective encouraged her. "We had help from my in-laws. Steve's mom stayed home and helped care for Stephanie while I returned to work. Steve always called his parents by their first names, John and Mary. When Stephanie was old enough, she started calling them by their first names, too." "A true daddy's girl," Detective Lincoln murmured. "And your own parents?" "They were Grandpa and Grandma to Stephanie," Nancy replied. "Everything seemed perfect. No mortgage, my daughter was being cared for by her grandma, I had a loving husband, and Stephanie had a devoted father." "So, what went wrong?" Lincoln asked, her expression sharp. Nancy hesitated, her gaze distant as she recalled the past. "Living with my in-laws became suffocating. It felt like I was constantly under scrutiny. If I was even 10 minutes late from work, Mary would ask if there had been heavy traffic. When I went shopping alone, she'd inquire where I was going and when I'd be back. And if I wore a form-fitting dress for work, she'd comment on it. It felt like living in a prison." "Maybe she was just overprotective," Lincoln suggested. Nancy shook her head. "Maybe. But Steve is the kindest person I know. He would never intentionally hurt me. One day he told me that we had been in love even before we were born. That's Steve, my husband. Have you ever mentioned to him that his mother seems to always be watching over him?" "No, I've never said anything. He was so incredibly close to his parents that I never thought it was the right moment to bring it up. I knew that if he ever found out, he'd start looking for a place of his own and move out with his family. That was something I desperately didn't want to happen." Nancy burst into tears. He had sworn to protect me, love me, and continuously show me how much he cared. He'd always treated me like royalty. "Do you need a moment, Nancy?" Lincoln asked, his tone gentle with concern. "No, let's finish this." "I just need to get home," she responded. "As you wish." Lincoln sighed. "So, what changed? What made you see things differently?" When Steph turned 8, John decided to retire early. He purchased a 3-bedroom condo in Naples, Florida, near the beach, and left the house to us. We only had to handle the utility bills, repairs, and property taxes. The house technically still belonged to John and Mary, but once they moved out, it felt like I had regained my independence. The change was tough on Steve and Steph, though. I began dressing however I pleased, no longer caring about anyone's judgment. In the late afternoons after work, I didn't have to explain my whereabouts anymore. My co-workers, who had always invited me to girls' nights out, nights I'd always declined, were stunned when I showed up by myself one Friday at their regular bar. "Did Steve really let you go out alone?" they asked. "Yes, he did," I replied. "He trusted me completely. He loved me deeply. And he never denied me anything. He trusted me above all." In our group, some women were single, some married, some loyal to their partners, and some weren't. Whatever happened on those nights out stayed there. I always made sure to stay clear of the men we met. But then, one Friday night, everything shifted. I met a married man. We talked, drank, and danced. On the dance floor, he pulled me close, and I felt the chemistry between us. It was exhilarating. After a couple of dances, he led me outside to his car, parked away from the crowd. He opened the back door and we became intimate. I asked him to use protection. Without hesitation, he went to the glove compartment and grabbed one. He was with me in an instant, and the intensity of it all was overwhelming. When it ended, he took the protection off, tied it up, and zipped his pants. He helped me out of the car, and I could still feel the sensations lingering. He shut the door, thanked me for the experience, and handed me the used protection. The warmth of it still in my hand, he got in and drove off. I tossed it in a nearby trash can and walked back to the bar. "Why did you cheat on Steve?" Lincoln asked. His curiosity piqued. "Because I could," I answered, without hesitation. It was thrilling, but it was just physical. When I arrived home that night, Steve was already asleep. I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. I promised myself I would never repeat it. But then, I remembered the vows I had made at the altar, in front of God, our friends, and family. That realization kept me awake for hours, drowning in self-hate. The next day, I couldn't even look him in the eyes. He asked if something was wrong, and I lied. I told him I wasn't feeling well, but the truth was, I was consumed by guilt. That evening, trying to atone for my actions, I showered him with love and affection. He responded with his usual warmth, and the following morning, I woke him up with tenderness. "When did you cheat on him again?" Lincoln asked, now more genuinely curious. "I stopped attending the monthly girls' nights," Nancy said. "Whenever my coworkers invited me, I always made up an excuse. 6 months later, despite my attempts to avoid it, they continued asking me to join them. One of my coworkers, Carmela, the senior member of our department, spoke up for me. She told everyone I wasn't interested and to stop pressuring me. Later at lunch, she sat beside me. Carmela, in her mid-50s and already a grandmother, had never joined us for girls' nights. She asked me why I'd stopped coming. I didn't want to be alone with other men, I confessed. The temptation was too strong. I was afraid I'd crossed the line. She looked me square in the eye and asked, "Have you already crossed it?" At that moment, I couldn't lie. I told her the truth and shared how deeply it had hurt me. "As someone who's lived through her own struggles, I hope she gave you sound advice," Lincoln interrupted. Nancy nodded, then lowered her head. She grasped my hand and began telling her own story. She had married young, had 2 daughters, both of whom were now married with children. After menopause, she struggled with her aging body, something she couldn't accept. She started wearing tight dresses with low necklines, using heavy makeup, and styling her hair like younger women. Her husband was okay with it, but it still didn't make her feel fulfilled. On a Saturday afternoon, after finishing a trip to the store, she ended up at a coffee shop, where a young man, seemingly in his early 20s, sat next to her. When she finished her coffee, he boldly asked if she would be interested in some fun. Surprised at first, she smiled and inquired if he knew of a quiet, private spot. Without hesitation, he suggested they go to his car and drive to an underground parking lot, assuring her there were no security cameras. In the back seat, they briefly shared an intimate moment. As time passed, their encounters grew more regular. After 6 months, he introduced a friend and then another, until she found herself meeting with young men in their 20s more frequently. She made sure to keep these rendezvous a secret from her husband, carefully maintaining her discretion. When asked if she regretted any of it, she admitted that she did. She explained that her heart was solely with her husband, and with the younger men, it was only physical. To ease her conscience, she never allowed them to kiss her deeply, reserving that level of intimacy exclusively for her husband. She justified it by telling herself that as long as her husband was unaware, no one was truly harmed. It was a complicated situation. "Tell me you weren't influenced by her," I asked. Sadly, I had been. My nights out with friends resumed, but this time I went out alone. Steve thought I was with coworkers. I chose to only meet with married men, believing they would be more discreet, since they were already cheating. It's shocking how many married men are out there, seeking affairs. Where there's demand, there's always supply, Lincoln commented. I always ended things after 6 or 8 months. Nancy didn't seem to mind Lincoln's sarcastic remarks. I was too scared that a longer relationship might endanger my marriage. At the same time, it gave me the chance to meet different types of men. After each one, I would take a break for a couple of months before finding another. How do you find them? She asked. Like I said before, they're everywhere. Mainly in bars and places like that. We would meet in motels on Saturdays, often when I was out shopping on my own, leaving Steve at home to manage the household and care for Stephanie. Occasionally, I'd take a long lunch break at work or have a quick encounter in the back seat of my car after a long day. You were very busy. How did you manage it without feeling exhausted or guilty? I got used to it, I replied. But one thing's for sure, I never turned Steve down. He could have me whenever he wanted, and I was always open with him. Certain things, though, were reserved for my other partners. In my mind, he was the only one who truly had me. Additionally, I insisted that my partners use protection, even though I was on birth control. I didn't want to take any risks with infections that could affect Steve. Life carried on smoothly until I met Lou 6 months ago, the biggest mistake I ever made. Lincoln shook her head at the thought. How did you meet Lou Cipher? She asked. One Saturday, I was at the supermarket, reaching down for a bottle of juice from a lower shelf, when someone accidentally bumped into me. I turned, startled, and saw it was Lou. He quickly apologized, explaining he had tripped. There was no one else in the aisle, so it was hard to tell if it was on purpose. He smiled and walked away. Later, as I headed toward my car, I couldn't stop thinking about him. He seemed genuinely interested. Just as I was about to get into my car, he appeared and apologized again. This time, I could tell he was attracted to me. He wasn't dressed particularly well, and I suspected it may have been intentional to catch my attention. I reassured him that it was simply an accident. He invited me for coffee, and I showed him my wedding ring, explaining that I was married. He said he wasn't, and then wrote his name and number on a piece of paper, telling me to reach out if I ever wanted to talk to a friend. You didn't throw it away, did you? She asked. I held on to the number. For the rest of the day and the week that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about him. By Friday, I couldn't resist and called him. He was expecting it. We made plans to meet the next day at his place. He gave me his address. I had always avoided visiting my partners at their homes for obvious reasons, but the idea of going to his place felt exciting. I was breaking my own rules, but I couldn't help but be intrigued. The following Saturday, we met. The first thing I told him was that he needed to use protection. He hesitated but agreed, and I also set some clear boundaries. I wasn't into certain activities. He accepted my terms. He knew how to please me, and I experienced intense pleasure multiple times. So, it wasn't just a one-time thing? She asked. Nancy shook her head. No. We continued to meet, just like I did with the others. But after about 3 months, I began to notice he was becoming a bit possessive. On an evening out with friends, he urgently asked me to spend the night with him, saying he longed to wake up in his arms the next morning. How could I say yes? How could I even consider it? Then he proposed that we meet more often, a suggestion I turned down. A short time later, he handed me a packet of powder and told me to slip it into Steve's drink at dinner. He promised me that Steve would be knocked out completely. Afterward, he would come to my house and share my bed, while Steve slept next to us. The audacity of it shocked me, and I immediately made it clear that I would have no part in such a plan. That moment opened my eyes to the fact that I needed to sever all ties with him. I started avoiding him, no longer meeting him for lunch or after work. I made up excuses to avoid his company. It took 3 Saturdays before we met again, but his demeanor had shifted. He was irritable and hostile. During our second meeting, he told me to stop being intimate with Steve. I was stunned. Steve was my partner. He was the one I was committed to. After that, I didn't see Lou for nearly a month. Despite my best efforts to distance myself, he continued calling and texting. Sometimes, I'd reply, telling him I was busy or still hurt from our last encounter. He apologized profusely and even sent flowers to my office. Eventually, I agreed to meet him one last time to put everything to rest. I realized I had crossed a line, and it was time to end it all. That meeting was meant to be the final one, after which I would focus on being the best wife I could be. Nancy glanced away from Lincoln, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. As always, she continued, we met at his place. We were together when, out of nowhere, he tried to turn me around. At first, I thought he simply wanted to change positions, but then I could feel him attempting to force himself on me in a way I had already rejected before. I struggled free from the bed and tried to escape. He grabbed my arm, yanking me back forcefully. Instinctively, I kicked him hard in a sensitive spot. He released me, doubled over in pain. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and threatened to call 911 if he didn't stop. He groaned in agony but didn't say a word, curling into a fetal position on the floor. I shouted at him, telling him I never wanted to see him again. I quickly dressed and left his house. Did he try to contact you afterward? No. For the entire week he didn't reach out, until this morning. Nancy sighed, shaking her head. After missing 10 calls from him, I blocked his number, but then he called the home phone. I have no idea how he got that number since I never gave it to him. Maybe he found it through your contacts without you knowing. Maybe. I had just gone into the bathroom when Steve went to the liquor store to pick up some wine. He was planning a surprise with coco van and tiramisu for dessert. Steph answered the phone, and Lou introduced himself, claiming to be a colleague and needing to discuss something urgent. She told him I was busy and that I'd get back to him later. After hearing this, I asked my daughter to clean her room, knowing she'd blast the music while doing so. I then went to the basement and called Lou on my cell. Nancy paused, looking down at the floor. "What did he say?" Lincoln asked after a moment of silence. He insisted that I come to his house right away, or he would tell Steve about our affair. I told him calmly that I planned to tell Steve myself. I explained that Steve loved me deeply and would forgive me. We would attend therapy together, and I would never look at another man again. Steve would be the only one for me, for the rest of my life. Nancy sobbed, wiping her tears away. That's when he said something that rattled me to my core. "What did he say?" Lincoln asked, his face hardening. "He said that Steve, being a wine lover, surely had great taste." I froze, speechless. Then he said, "If he couldn't have me, no one could." A moment later, I heard 2 gunshots followed by screaming. Panic surged within me. I screamed at him, asking what was going on, what he had done. There was silence until I heard the sound of a car door slamming. Then he repeated those chilling words, "If I can't have you, nobody can." I heard another gunshot. My heart was pounding as I rushed to my car and sped toward the liquor store. When I arrived, the police had already blocked off the area with yellow tape. In the parking lot, Steve lay lifeless with 2 gunshot wounds to his chest. Nancy broke down, tears pouring down her face. Lou Cipher was found dead in his car nearby, a bullet hole in the back of his head. It seemed he had taken his own life. Lincoln gently took Nancy's hand. "You have a daughter to care for," he said softly. She nodded and turned to face the mirror. "Your parents are waiting for you in the front office. Let's go. I will take you to them." As they walked down the hallway, Lincoln paused and turned to face Nancy. "From everything you've told me, Steve was the epitome of what a husband and father should be. He cherished his family, was a master in the kitchen, and was always present for them. He handled the housework, maintained the yard, and kept everything in order. He granted you complete freedom, never forcing his own desires upon you. He was the perfect husband, the one every woman longs for. Yet, you betrayed him. That was a grave error, a heartbreaking one. With that, Lincoln turned and walked away. Nancy hurried over to her parents, enveloping them in a tight embrace, her tears filling the room. "You left Steph at home alone?" she asked, her voice trembling with concern. John and Mary had arrived an hour before. After receiving a call from Stephanie, they had caught the next available flight. "Let's go home," they said, taking Nancy by the arms as they led her out of the building. Once they returned to the house, Nancy saw that some of Stephanie's friends were gathered inside. The instant Nancy saw John and Mary, it was clear they were not pleased to see her. "I need to see Stephanie." "Where is she?" Nancy asked, her voice unsteady. "She's upstairs with some friends," Mary replied. Just as she spoke, Stephanie appeared at the top of the stairs, surrounded by her friends. The swollen eyes were a clear indication that she had been crying for hours. "Dad!" Stephanie screamed, her voice filled with rage. "Get this unfaithful woman out of our house!" She glared at Nancy with disdain. "You killed my father, you cheater!" "No," Nancy cried out, her tears flowing freely. "Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, traitor," Stephanie shot back. "It's all over the news, the internet, and social media. Lover kills cheating wife's husband, then takes his own life." Everyone in the room froze, taken aback by the intensity of Stephanie's anger. Her friends attempted to console her, but their efforts were futile. Stephanie stormed over to her grandparents. "I don't want her here anymore. Make her leave." "Please, Steph," Nancy pleaded, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." "My father died without knowing that his loving wife was a liar and a cheater," Stephanie snapped. "He was murdered without ever understanding why, without knowing that the man who killed him was the same man who shared a bed with his wife. He died unaware of the betrayal. It's a tragedy that will haunt us forever." At that moment, Grandpa attempted to intervene. "Let's focus on what needs to be done right now, and later we can address our emotions. With her here?" "Absolutely not," Stephanie retorted harshly. "Please, Steph, don't speak to your mother like that," Grandma begged, her voice trembling. "Let her speak," John barked, his anger flaring. Mary quickly grabbed his arm, trying to calm him down. "Mary," John seethed, "we lost our son today because of this woman." Stephanie's friends, clearly uncomfortable, excused themselves and began heading for the door. "You know the truth," John continued, his voice icy. "Your daughter is a cheater. We all know it. And now, the entire world knows, after my only son was murdered. It's supposed to be the child who buries the parent, not the other way around. Today, we bury our son." Stephanie turned to her grandparents, her voice dripping with bitterness. "My dad will be buried in Naples," she said. "You know people here. You have connections. Make it happen. And above all," she added, "I need you to find a lawyer. Get the adoption papers prepared. Please, Steph, don't do this. Don't make a decision you'll regret later," Grandpa pleaded. "You can't do this to me," Nancy cried out, her voice desperate. "I can't live under the same roof as this cheater. I can't breathe the same air." "She makes me sick," Stephanie spat, her face twisted with disgust. "I don't want to see her anymore," Stephanie declared, turning again to John. "Tell her to leave." Grandma, her face streaked with tears, sobbed, "We're your grandparents too. You can't just throw us away." Stephanie, her voice steady despite her tears, spoke softly. "Grandma, Grandpa, I love you both. I respect you, and I'll never forget everything you've done for me. But your daughter is a cheater, and I can't bear to be around her." Turning back to John, she added, "I'm a Westford, and that's who I am. On Monday, you'll take me to school, and I'll need my transcript and other paperwork to transfer. The house needs to be sold, too. There are just too many painful memories here." John nodded and pulled Stephanie close for a comforting embrace. "We'll handle everything. You're right. You'll also need to take whatever you want from this house," he said firmly to Nancy. "The rest will go to Goodwill." Weeks later, Stephanie relocated to Naples, Florida. Her relationship with Nancy remained broken beyond repair. She only communicated with her grandparents when they reached out, and every week she visited her father's grave. John and Mary had become her new parents. Nancy, on the other hand, began seeing a therapist, but her condition only worsened with time. After a few months, she was admitted to a psychiatric institution. The doctor suggested that Stephanie meet her mother, even just once, to help Nancy heal, but Stephanie refused. Her decision was final. On the morning of her 18th birthday, a nurse discovered Nancy in her bed, unresponsive, a pool of blood beneath her. She had ended her own life by slashing her wrists during the night. Stephanie did not attend the funeral. Our story has come to an end. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the way I tell stories, head over to my channel and check out my other videos. May the force be with you. See you soon, my friend.